Hello, I am the Lady Miss Vagina Jenkins, and it is time for Queer Astrology. So this is part 3 in a 3-part series where we talk about the basics of learning to interpret your own natal astrology chart. So just as a reminder, in part 1, we talked about how to find your big 3. We talked about how to find your chart ruler and where to look for the light in your chart. In part 2, we got a little bit more in depth and we talked about night charts versus day charts. We talked about the 4 quadrants in a natal astrology chart. We talked about the elements, fire, air, earth, water, and the modes, cardinal, fixed, mutable. And we touched on the concept of essential dignity. And in this part, I'm going to get into the houses, the signs, and the planets. That's where we've been and where we're going today. I just want to point out that this is not a matter of like saving the best for last in terms of talking about the houses and signs in the 3rd part of this series, because I think the information that we covered in the 1st and 2nd parts is actually more foundational to your understanding of your natal astrology chart. I think a lot of times people jump immediately into the houses, signs, etc. without understanding those more important foundational concepts. And so that's why I have put these things in this order. I think of the houses as the where in terms of like what area of my life are we focused on right now? And I think of the signs as how you do that particular area of life. And I think of the planets as a sort of who all gonna be there type energy. So let's start with the houses. So I understand the astrology houses in terms of them being on axes, the plural of axis. So I think of the first axis, so the 1st house and the 7th house as the axis that talks about relationships. So the 1st house being devoted to my relationship with myself, my understanding of my identity, how I move through the world, how I express my identity, versus the 7th house, which is directly across from the 1st house. And it speaks to my relationships with others. What am I drawn to? What traits am I drawn to? How do I do my relationships with others? And by relationships, I mean all sorts of connections, all sorts of one-on-one connections. Your best friend, platonic friends, your co-workers, any intimate one-on-one relationships. And then next axis as the axis of money and resources. And that is the 2nd house and the 8th house, which is directly across from it. And so the 2nd house is devoted to my money, how I earn my money, what my resources are, what my values around money are. And then the 8th house is more concerned with other people's money, shared resources, the experience of taxes or inheritances, money that you get or give from external sources. So yeah. And then the next axis I think of as the axis of the mind. Which sounds really heady, I know, but the 3rd house and the 9th house directly across from it. So the 3rd house is how I think, my thought processes, communication styles, the way that I gather information and data. And then the 9th house directly across from it is more about how I analyze and apply that information. It's kind of like also the higher information, higher learning. And I don't just mean like academia, though academia can be there, but also like, I guess it's the difference between data and belief systems, right? These belief systems are made from gathering data, analyzing data, and applying it. The next axis I think of as the axis of foundations. It is the 4th house and the 10th house directly across from it. So the 4th house is our experience of home, families, both families of origin and the families that we create, how we do that. Our ancestors, that's a big thing that really is of value to me. I'm a fourth houser. And so yeah, that 4th house experience versus the 10th house experience, which is more about our external foundations. And so our jobs, the ways that we do our careers, the ways in which we are known, like our public reputation in the world. I would also add that, remember that concept about the night versus the day chart? Well, these houses sit in both the darkest parts of the night and the brightest parts of the day. And that's something to remember as you're thinking about this axis as well. That the 4th house sits in the place that we might want to keep private, keep to ourselves, keep secret, whereas the 10th house sits in the most brightest part of the sky. It is the thing that people can very clearly see about us and receive about us as well. Next axis I think of as the axis of pleasure. The 5th house and then the 11th house, which sits directly across from it. The 5th house is devoted to private pleasures, so like your hobbies, your creative self-expression. Yes, a little bit about your dating and sex life. It can also deal with children, you know. These are the children are the results of the 4th house, the family that we make, you know. And then the 11th house I would say is more public pleasures, in that it could be devoted to like the friend groups that we belong to as a result of our 10th house reputation. It can be a lot about how we build things and experience joy in groups, in our friend groups, our co-workers, that kind of thing. It's a more group and public experience because, again, night versus day, right? And the last axis is the 6th and 12th house axis, which I think of as the axis of care. I would say the 6th house is more devoted to self-care, while the 12th house is more devoted to spiritual care. And what I mean by that is that, like, 6th house, you can find your health experiences, your daily routines and schedules and how you do those things. Your job, not your career, but like your jobs that you have because they're part of your daily routine. It's just really mundane stuff. Whereas the 12th house is more spiritual. It's about spiritual service. It's about connecting to you know, our spiritual care, which helps us to connect to something that's like greater than ourselves. That kind of energy. So the 12 houses is just a really brief guide to those 12 houses. Now let's get into the planets before we get into the signs, because I think that we're going to need the information about the planets to inform the signs. So in terms of the planetary placements, 2 of them are not planets, the sun and the moon. They are sources of light, you know, the light coming from the sun and the light coming from the sun being reflected onto the moon. And so sometimes we'll call them planets, but really what they are known in astrology terms as is luminaries, sources of light. Let's talk about the difference between them. So the sun shines on us and we can imagine ourselves as little plants that are fed by the sun. So the sun can speak a lot to our vitality, our energy, and also if it's a source of light in the chart, we can see the place in which you shine the brightest. Whereas the moon is maybe the shadow side of the sun. It's more about our emotional landscape. The sun is how we might shine publicly, then the moon is how we might shine privately. Moon sign speaks to what we need to feel emotionally safe in our deepest, most intimate connections. And we get into the planets. Mercury speaks to our mental landscape, the ways that we think, the ways that we process information, the ways that we speak, write, learn, especially like our childhood school experiences. Then Venus, which yes, has to do with, romantic and sexual love, but even more so, I would say Venus is how we attract all kinds of things to us. Romantic, sexual partners, money, our values around the money that we attract and what we think we need to do in order to attract money, beauty, art. This is all sort of Venusian stuff. And if Venus is about attracting what you want, I think of Mars as the passion and drive to pursue what you want and what you feel passionate about, generally speaking, in life. And then there's Jupiter, which is the biggest planet in the solar system, which helps me remember its role in astrology is about expanding things. Wherever Jupiter is in your chart, you can expect to have a lot of that experience. It also is known as a planet of luck and blessings. And if Jupiter is here to expand things, then Saturn is here to limit, to provide structures, to provide containers for things. They're not necessarily the opposite, but sometimes it helps me to make sense of things by comparing them, And so Saturn is about limits, structures, containers, but also about hard work over time. And what I mean by that is that often the place where we find Saturn in our chart is a place that we have to work hard to learn the lessons of that area of life. But as we age, we become more and more successful at that area of life because of that hard work in learning those lessons. So those planets are all of the planets covered in traditional Hellenistic astrology, right? And then the last three planets are the planets that are covered by modern astrology. Basically, as our telescope technology became more and more advanced, we were able to see more and more of our known universe. And so then these planets get added into the astrological mix. Also important to mention that some of these planets that are closer to Earth, astrologers think of them as having a greater influence on us because they're literally closer to us. So they're known as like the personal planet. They also have really quick transit times. For example, Mercury changes signs like every 3 weeks or so. Uranus is the planet that deals with how we innovate or, at the extreme, rebel in the world. And so the place where you find Uranus in your chart is a place where you might find yourself going against the grain, being and doing and thinking different. Neptune is the planet of dreams and illusions. And I think of those two qualities as two sides of the same coin. Like, dreams definitely are necessary in our world because they propel us forward, but when we become a little too invested in our dreams, they can be delusions, illusions that don't necessarily serve us. And finally, Pluto, the longest transit time, the farthest planet away from us. And it speaks to our relationship to power dynamics, as well as our relationship to transformation over time. So a Pluto planet in a chart can show us where we struggle to maintain power or where we lose our personal power. And it can also speak to that kind of transformational energy, whether we are doing the transforming of that particular area of life or being deeply transformed by it. Then that leads me to the 12 signs. Remember in video 2 where we talked about the modes and the elements? That's going to be useful here. And then, yeah, the information that we just talked about with the planets. That's the 3 categories of information that I'm going to use to talk about the signs. And that's why I've saved them for last. Which, isn't that funny? I think that most people jump into natal astrology with the signs, and it is the thing that I am actually saving for last. I don't know. It's just different ways of approaching things, I suppose. Remember the ideas that we talked about in our last video, which I'll link up here, around the elements and the modes. The modes being cardinal, fixed, or mutable. Cardinal being about leadership, sparking and starting the idea. Fixed being committed to and working the idea. Mutable being transitioning and going with the flow into new ideas and new places. And then we talked about the elements: fire, air, earth, water. Fire being about passion, spark, excitement. Earth being about groundedness and stability. Air being about communications, ideas, and water being about the emotional realm or intuition. So yeah, those are the elements and modes that we'll reference as we're talking about the signs. And then we just talked about the planets. So let's put it all together. Starting with Aries, it is a cardinal fire sign ruled by Mars. So leader in the realm of passion, ruled by Mars. And then Taurus, we have a fixed earth sign ruled by Venus. Fixed, committed, earth, groundedness, stability, and Venus. Then there's Gemini, which is a mutable air sign, going with the flow of information and ideas, ruled by Mercury. Then we have Cancer, which is a cardinal water sign ruled by the moon. So a leader in the realm of the emotions and feelings and intuitions, ruled by the moon. Then we have Leo, a fixed fire sign ruled by the sun. Fixed, committed to the idea of passion and drive and excitement, ruled by the sun. And then we have Virgo, which is a mutable earth sign ruled by Mercury. Mutability, going with the flow, earth, groundedness and stability, ruled by Mercury. Then we have Libra, which is a cardinal air sign ruled by Venus. So a leadership in the realm of communications, ideas, ruled by Venus. And then we have Scorpio, which is a fixed water sign ruled by Mars in traditional astrology and Pluto in modern astrology, double planetary rulers. fixed, committed to the idea of emotions, intuition, and ruled by Mars and Pluto. Then we have Sagittarius, mutable fire sign ruled by Jupiter. So mutability, going with the flow of fire, passions, and ruled by Jupiter. Then we have Capricorn, which is a cardinal earth sign ruled by Saturn. So cardinal, leader, earth, groundedness, stability, ruled by Saturn. Then we have Aquarius, which is a fixed air sign ruled by both Saturn and Uranus. So fixed, committed to the idea of ideas, air energy, communications, ideas, thought patterns, that kind of thing, ruled by both Saturn and Uranus. And finally, Pisces, mutable water ruled by both Jupiter and Neptune. Mutability, going with the flow of water, intuition, feelings, the emotional world, ruled by Jupiter and Neptune. So yeah, that is all 12 of the signs, all of the houses, and all of the planets in this third video in our series. In the next video, I want to show you how I synthesize and apply all of this information, and how you as a beginner, intermediate astrology student can start to interpret your own natal chart. So definitely subscribe and be sure to check out that video next Wednesday. That's it. That's all of the ideas I have right now. Thank you so much, as always, for watching and for making time for queer astrology.